Hello, and welcome to another TFT mini. We are here to talk about evaluating synergy. This is not a corporate training video. This is
Though it could
a
be.
yeah, it could be. Hopefully, it's a little bit more exciting than that. Certainly not required. It should be though. But we're just gonna talk about synergy and list building. And Mike, is it fair to say it's not just for clones and droids anymore?
No,
Maybe it never was.
yeah, I would maybe offer that it never was. I
Fair,
think
fair.
that there are certainly some synergistic abilities like the clone trooper keyword
Right.
that look that paint a more synergistic picture, kind of lay it out in front of you, right?
Yeah. 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 Clones is like the crayon version of synergy where you just like sort of see it all there.
Yeah.
Whereas it is important for any list that you're making. And I guess, we've had similar discussions before about like where does this come into play in list building? It should probably be ever present.
Yes.
Obviously, like any list is going to start out with what is like the one unit that I want to be. It may be more than one unit, but like what do I want the core of this list to be? And you may have various reasons for doing that. But I guess I'm curious about, is that the way you think about it, Mike? Is like if you have a centerpiece of the list, are you designing based on what will synergize with that centerpiece, or is it something more than that?
That's an interesting question. I think the answer is it depends.
Of course.
uh, but I think that often it doesn't have to have anything to do with your centerpiece.
Okay.
I
Yeah, I
think
think that's fair.
I think often in Legion, like your centerpiece is often like a Jedi or a Bad Batch or something similar to those. Generally they're named units. Sometimes
Yeah.
they're like a heavy tank or whatever.
Right. Right. Right.
Um, but generally, you're taking them as a centerpiece unit because they're like a heavy hitter or they do something specific and they don't really require synergy to be effective on the tabletop, right? And so when I'm thinking about synergy, particularly in list building, I am thinking about generally how all of the things that fit around them fit together.
Yeah, and part of this does get into uh, a discussion about range bands, which will actually be another video, and and then there's like very straightforward examples, such as the various forms of token sharing, right? Like so, that is a way that you can sort of ensure that there's at least certain units that are going to like help make your other units better. But this also comes into play when it comes to like what are the command cards that you're going to pick. It comes into play when it comes to what are the upgrades that you're going to take. Um, like I guess the way, I mean, if you had to describe synergy, like using words that aren't synergy, like
Sure.
what's the way that you would do it?
I think that the best way that I would describe this is that you want your units to uh this is like the definition of synergy or whatever.
That's fine. That's what we're
Work
doing.
together, right? In a way that they are more than the sum of their parts, right? So I think a really great example of this is actually Isaiah's world's
Oh,
list.
absolutely. Yeah.
I think in a way that like he was thinking about things synergistically that like other people were not yet, right? He decided to use Kenobi as a synergistic wound battery for his ARC troopers, right?
Yeah.
Which not only has Kenobi never been uh like used like that really before. Like he was used like that, I guess, before, but for range gun lines, not like things that like wanted to charge you in melee, right? So there was like some timing synergy there with moving his pieces up the board at the right time, and then
Right.
he also decided that he had wanted to have two ISPs with range 4 weapons and one commando squad, and that was just enough of a unit to effectively like pull enough of his opponent's army away
It
from the
took pressure off the Kenobi ball.
exactly, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so all of these pieces were working in conjunction with each other in ways that if you just looked at that list on paper, you'd be like, what am I looking at?
I think a lot of people looked at Isaiah's list on paper and were like, what the hell is happening?
Yeah.
Because if you took that list, and Isaiah would tell you this, if you took that list and just like sort of went hard charging in, you would lose like 95% of your games.
Yep.
Because that is not the thing the list does. But like you said, it's not just the idea that it's not just the very direct concept of Kenobi being a shield generator or wound battery for his trooper units, but it was the fact that he had this like sort of secondary force of the double ISP and the commando that was taking in just enough pressure, like often more points than what the ISPs and commandos were worth.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
he was telling us that sometimes they would be distracting like half of his opponent's army. And then, if you had the other parts of Isaiah's army against half of most armies, like it's not going to go well for the other guy.
They
And I think
crush it,
that's a
right?
big,
It's like
big part of
700
why.
points against 450 or
Exactly,
something, right?
exactly. It's a big part of why that won. And so I guess like the way that we're talking about it, it factors into a concept that Dave Grant shared on an episode of Notorious Scoundrels, which is that any list that you want to be successful, you need to have a plan for it, and that is something that Isaiah clearly had. It certainly helped him that most of his opponents, maybe all of them, didn't really know what his plan was going to be. But he had a plan and he found a way to make it work, and he's still been succeeding with that list, even though everybody knows what it is now. Um, so yeah, I like that. Is that you're trying to make the list more than the sum of its parts. I think that a counterexample of why like you do need to try to have a little bit of synergy is that historically the lists that are just like I'm gonna put six ACM B2s in here, and then like a few BXs, and then just like charge directly at my opponent and shoot at them. It doesn't work.
No.
Those lists don't tend to do very well. Because a list like that, if you're like mass B2s has basically no synergy, right? It's just a bunch of
It's
blocks.
just a chunk of wounds on the
Right,
board, and your
right.
opponent has to eat through it, but it doesn't actually allow you. One of the things that you should be looking for in your synergies is like how units can kind of cover each other on the board, right? Like
Hmm.
how they move around and stuff. If you just take a bunch of B2s, like you just have a bunch of B2s, and you have no units that can maybe tackle a point that you lost a unit that you didn't know that you were going to lose. You have nothing fast to make up the difference, right?
Yeah.
Um, so, I think, again, I'm going to go back to Isaiah's list because I think it's a really great example of a list that like has things that cover his bases. But like he's got two ISPs in there. If all of a sudden he needs to like jump on a point that he had no idea he needed to jump on, he can do that because those ISPs can race across the
Is
board
he's
like
the third
almost
fastest unit in the
immediately.
game or whatever
Yeah,
to do it.
right. And
Um,
it doesn't have to be an ISP, right? Like it can be you can have a unit in your list that fills those roles. Speeder bikes, the Mandos.
and the more roles that it fills, the more likely it's going to be that you can find synergy for that. Like this is like yet another example about why, as we're recording this, the 60-point Droideka is like truly one of the just like mega best units in the game
Yep,
because it is an LOS blocker, it is a suppressive gun. It's like decent dice. It's a vehicle, so it can't be suppressed, and it can be really fast when it needs to be.
yep,
Like it's all those things for 60 points. And so that means that there are multiple ways that it can help out your army by like utilizing all of those attributes to them in order to like help the rest of your army function better. And so, yeah, like there are, I guess that is to say that there are some units where it's a lot easier to find the synergy compared to the other ones. Like I think that those are to me two good examples of a unit that has a ton of synergy with a lot of things in the decas, and then a unit that it feels like has very little synergy with almost anything, which is the B2.
yeah. I think that's fair. I also think that it's important to call out that I think that there are there's like a strong difference between like synergy and a combo. Um,
Yeah, good point.
and like and they I think sometimes they can be confused a little bit. You know, Isaiah's list also had a combo in it, and that combo was Cody and
Cody,
Kenobi.
correct. Yeah.
And Kenobi's, you play Cody's two pip, Kenobi takes a bunch of wounds, and Cody just like shoots everything on the table, right?
Yep.
Which is sort of synergistic, but it's really a combo, right? Like that's
It's a
that
linear synergy.
it is a
It's
linear synergy. Yeah,
A and B make each other better, but what Kenobi is doing for the rest of the army, Kenobi is like A is making B, C, D, and E better.
right.
So like if you're really talking about synergy, like you want it to have more connected points on the web, so to speak.
Yeah.
Which is again like we use that Droideka example. Like it's so good because it can flex to whatever your list needs. It feels like at any given time. Um, yeah, so I guess the way I would maybe sum it up is that I don't necessarily always like start a list thinking about like what are the various synergies that I'm trying to get out of it. I think I would probably start with like what are the main like pool of units that I'd want, and then think about like the units that would work synergistically with those. It's because it's hard to think about synergy first. I feel like it's more organic as you're building the list.
It's definitely tough without playing a list like once or twice, right? You kind
Sure,
of
sure.
once you put it on the table, you kind of like feel what you might be missing, and then you
Yeah,
kind of have
yeah.
to like fill in the holes. But I would say generically that make sure you have one or two units that can move to cover your other units, like on POIs, like they can get places quick, right?
Yeah.
And then when you're playing those units, you also want to keep them in a place where they can still do that function, right? A lot of this is not just restricted to list building, is that these synergies, if your stuff is out of position, they are not going to synergize together, right?
If your Kalani is alone in the corner, then your
He's
direct
not
and
directing anything.
exemplar are worthless.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, you want a couple fast movers, that goes for any list. Things that have charge sort of fit into that bubble because they can like double move and still attack, right? You're not
Yeah.
giving up anything to double move. Um, you want to make sure that you have at least a couple long range shooters. This is not really a long range game at the moment, but like you still want to be able to. The thing about having a couple long range shooters is like you want to make sure that your opponent has to at least like consider them in deployment,
Has
right?
something they need to respect. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, right. A couple ISPs and a commando, right?
Yeah.
You know, and then I think beyond that, you just want to pick some units that work well together. I think we've seen this in, Brian Bare's list with, Operative Luke and fleets and buses that like work together to kind of like the buses cover the, advance angles so that they can't see the fleets moving up. And then, all of a sudden there's fleets charging through the sides of buses and,
Yep.
you know, um,
And
yeah,
I think that there's room for the game to expand a little bit with the potential synergies that are out there. I think that it's one of those things that was like initially just hinted at when it came to like Han Solo and Chewie having the teamwork ability. Like that's sort of another like it's more of sort of a combo, sort of a synergy sort of deal. I'm hoping that as more releases come out that it'll like broaden the opportunities to gain synergy in some of the factions that don't have it a ton. But yeah, like if your list is only its parts, it's probably not going to do all that well. So try to make it more with synergy. How's that for corporate talk?
there we go. More synergy, more
More
now.
synergy now for the sake of your company.
Yeah.
All right, I think that's going to be it. Thank you for watching and listening, and check out our Patreon if you like what we're doing and think about supporting us there. But until next time, we'll see you in the next TFT mini.